Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anastasia Tsimiklis. I'm the CMO at Explorance, and I'm really excited to moderate today's session with our partners from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Today's conversation will focus on a topic that really matters to all institutions, which is around response rates. Important because strong participation leads to more credible insights, better decision-making, and ultimately a stronger student experience. And UNLV has an incredible story to share about how they integrate or how they've been integrating Explorance Blue with Canvas and how this integration has transformed their course evaluation experience and dramatically increased student participation. Their success also reflects the spirit of our newly launched Explorance Global Response Rates Tournament. More about that a little later. But our tournament is meant to help celebrate institutions that are driving innovation and excellence in student engagement. I'm very pleased to welcome today's speakers, Teresa Farmer and Kanika Wofford from UNLV. Thank you so much for being here and excited to get started.
Thank you so much, Anastasia.
Great.
And then I do not know if we're able to enable our camera, but you should be able to see our slides.
Yes, so we see your slides, but we don't see you both. But we do see your slides.
Does it let you on?
Okay, we're just gonna get started. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Kanika Wofford, and
I am Teresa Farmer. And thank you for coming today for our webinar, Beyond Surveys, How Integration with Explorance Blue Transforms Response Rate and Engagement.
So to begin, we're going to do a brief overview of what we'll be discussing in this presentation. If you're familiar with our story and our previous presentations, we're following a similar format. We'll go ahead and introduce ourselves and the university. We'll introduce you guys to some university statistics around our institution, as well as how we conduct course evaluations. We'll review a policy timeline, which will go over the historical policy changes that we've had, including the Canvas integration. Then we'll talk a little bit about how that integration went. We'll discuss response rates and a new metric that we've started tracking, which is interaction rate, and then we'll get to some conclusions. Perfect. And I did get the request to start video. Let's see if we can enable that. Okay, so.
At the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, the Office of Decision Support has quite a few important functions. So we have institutional research, institutional effectiveness, data governance, business intelligence, and a course evaluation. So this is a very, very good place for course evaluation, the course evaluation function to be placed, to be able to do institutional analysis to be able to do analysis at an institutional level for the results from the course evaluations each term. And so the course evaluation team is us. I am Teresa Farmer. I've been at UNLV for 19 years. I have been with the Office of Decision Support for 14 years. And in my particular role with course evaluations, it's almost 7 years.
Perfect. And I am Kanika Wofford. I've already introduced myself. And again, we apologize about the video for whatever reason it's not enabling. But I've worked for the institution for 7 years and with the Office of Decision Support for 6 years. I support Teresa in her capacity to conduct course evaluations and generally just kind of the person that helps support the processes through our course evaluations each year. So with that, we will move to some university statistics. So UNLV is a R1 university, and so there's a high level of research there. We currently have a population of 33,000 students, approaching 34,000 students. We have an undergraduate population of around 27, almost 28,000 students. And then you can see the metrics for the remaining head counts. So we also are a college that is comprised of 17 colleges, and course evaluations are done for each college except for the professional programs, which are law and dental. We also administer 100,000 course evaluations with each fall and spring. So lots of evaluations amongst these colleges. We maintain about 30 different questionnaires, and QBank is not one of the questionnaires we use for most of our colleges. However, we do have the College of Engineering, College of Hospitality, and our couples and family therapy program that utilize QBank. And then we use course evaluation data through PeopleSoft, and we do manual uploads. So we export it from PeopleSoft and import those into Blue for each course evaluation cycle. But you'll see later on in the presentation how that may be changing soon.
So as this would be a refresher for anyone that might have seen our presentations before, but this is in, an overview of some of the history and the policies regarding course evaluations at UNLV. So course evaluations have always been required at UNLV, but departments had free reign with how that was administered. But starting in the spring term of 2023, that changed. The university implemented a set of questions that was required to be included on all course evaluations that came from the provost office to make sure that was done consistently. All course evaluations had to be managed by our office now, which is, abbreviated as ODS. And the only exceptions were the professional school. So that is medicine, law, and dental. There is a program in the medicine School of Medicine that we do their course evaluations for. And previous to this time, we were doing the course evaluations for the majority of the departments. There were a few holdouts, and also departments had the final say on what our office would evaluate. At this time, everything that would be deemed organized instruction, so your lecture labs, discussion groups, were absolutely going to be evaluated. Departments were able to ask for their unorganized instruction. So thesis, independent study, internships, those types of sections are approved to be opted out. In summer of 2023 is when we have a very big milestone. We completed our Canvas and Blue deep integration. And prior to this, we had I refer to it as a bare bones integration. So Canvas and Blue were integrated, but students could only access their course evaluations from the user profile page. If they weren't using their phone, this didn't appear if they were on a mobile device, or if the instructor added the course link or the course evaluation link to their course page in Canvas. So this was not effective at all, unlike the deep integration. And that includes what I refer to as fancy features. So after the deep integration, when evaluations open from students, there's pop-ups every time they log in, there's announcements, there's calendar entries, and all of these things have links to their course evaluations. So students are able, when they're doing coursework, be reminded that they have open evaluations and easily access them. Course evaluations aren't required during the summer. It is by request by a department and instructor. So it's a very relaxed time, but just by making the course evaluations more accessible to our students, we had almost a 14% response rate. So that is huge. And also an important thing that happened, there was a significant behavior change that has remained permanent. The majority of our students now complete all of their course evaluations. Can you get disappeared? Through Canvas as opposed to the emailed link. I hope you can still hear me right now.
Yes, yes, we can hear you. Yes, you're all set. So we just can't see you, but we can see your slide.
Okay.
So yeah, all good.
Okay, so I think we're back.
Yeah.
So that was summer. In spring of 2024, oh, wait, spring of 2024 is when we successfully started the implementation of the content blocking policy. So content blocking is a feature that is available in with the deep integration. And what that means is that if students have open evaluations, they cannot access their course content in Canvas. And this can be set up different ways, but what we did at UNLV is we have it as class specific. So if a student didn't do an English 101 course evaluation, then they weren't able to access their English 101 course content in Canvas. So another thing that we did is we allowed students to opt out of the course evaluation process. And to do that, they would use the emailed link, and then that would go to their class page, their task page in blue, and each class would have an opt-out option next to it. And another thing we did, we adjusted the course evaluation window. Historically, students had 2 weeks to do their course evaluations. With the use of content blocking, we didn't want to give students less time. So they had 2 weeks to do their course evaluations at their own convenience to do them or opt them out. And they wouldn't be impacted by the content blocking. The third and the last week of the course evaluation window is when content blocking goes into effect. If the student does the course evaluation, they would get access back to their course content. If the student decides to opt out during this time, they have to wait until the next data sync. And that is clearly communicated to campus. In fall of 2025, we made another major change to our course evaluation process. We added the opt-out option to the course evaluation questionnaire. And I should mention, opting out is a feature in blue. It's not part of the deep integration. It is set up, it exists in blue. So we made it even easier for the students to access, to opt out of the course evaluations if they don't want to. As I mentioned before, most of our students do it through Canvas. Also, students that only had one open course evaluation were not seeing the option to opt out. The email link would go directly to their questionnaire, so they would have to email us. So for the students' convenience, we made it crazy easy for them to opt out of any course evaluations they didn't want to do. And it may not be surprising, but our opt-out percentages significantly increased after doing this. And also, unfortunately, our submissions also decreased when doing this. And I have some theories about this. So we of course made opting out very easy, but we also have 3 federal holidays during our course evaluation window for regularly scheduled classes. So I think fall semesters are always going to have lower response rates than, comparison to spring because of that. We had major leadership changes that occurred during this time. So I think everybody was just busy, distracted with new duties. And also the previous academic year, particularly spring of 2025, was pretty great. And I think people made assumptions that was the new norm, and any effort or conversations they had about course evaluations during that time didn't happen during fall of 2025. And so for the charts, just very quickly, we have our submitted response rates. I do want to point out that anything for spring of 2026 is almost official. Our course evaluation cycle is going to close this Saturday. So for our Boston presentation, we will have our official numbers. But for right now, these are almost official. But you can see starting in fall of 2021, before we did the deep integration, our response rates kind of plateaued at 31-32%. But after our deep integration, even though we did take a dive in the fall of last semester for fall, our response rates have remained significantly higher than when we had prior to the deep integration. And starting with the opt-outs, we have that new metric that Kanika mentioned and that we'll talk more about, which is the interaction rate. And this is the combination of submitted and opted out evaluations during a term, because those students are making active decisions regarding their course evaluations as opposed to just ignoring them. So this is something that we will talk more about.
Perfect. So to summarize some of the effects of Canvas integration, we have some significant changes and really what makes Canvas integration such a powerful tool. So prior, as Teresa said, our institutional response rate was always in the low 30s. And without any assistance from faculty or allowing time in class, students were not prompted to complete their course evaluations. Most people were completing their course evaluations through an emailed link to their Rebel Mail. And we've seen historically that students are just not responsive to email. And so the other 25% of our student population that was actually submitting course evaluation was doing that through PeopleSoft, which we had a link available for students, and through Canvas. Again, Teresa has mentioned that Canvas had a bare bones integration, so they were able to access them, but it was really dependent on whether the instructor provided a link for the students on their actual course page. And students weren't necessarily engaging with that as much. We also see that most submission activity was on the first day when they got the first email, or on the last day when we sent a reminder email that the course evaluations would close and they would lose the opportunity to respond. And so that really informed how we targeted students for evaluation feedback, and making sure that we would catch their eye with emails. And then obviously, because of the 31% response rate, most people were not completing course evaluations after Canvas deep integration. And if you know anything about our university, the integration tools that we utilized are a little non-traditional, but simply by adding access to announcements, calendar invites, and eventually we would get to content blocking, we saw that most students are actually completing their course evaluations through Canvas. Some of them were still doing the emailed link, but almost no people were completing them in PeopleSoft. And so as concessions to students, right, because this course content blocking policy was a little controversial on our campus, we decided to extend the evaluation cycle to 3 weeks. Initially, it was 2 weeks. In the first 2 weeks, you get to complete your course evaluation without content blocking. And then on the final week, course content blocking would go into effect, meaning that they would not have access to the individual courses that they had not completed course evaluations for. And so another concession that we made in order to support students is to move the evaluation cycle up 1 week. And so the content closing would happen before study week. And study week is just the week that students use to prepare for finals, and they do need that access to Canvas. And so we shifted up the course evaluation dates. In addition to that, students can now opt out. As Teresa has mentioned, they were initially offered an opt-out through the Blue site that they were provided, and now they also are able to opt out on the questionnaire, which allows for them to have flexibility on how they engage with the survey. And then most students are still completing their course evaluation, and we are encouraged by that because with 30%, and now we're averaging over 60% response rates, even with these concessions, it's been a major success for our university.
So to do a visual example of the effect of content blocking, so this is from our response rate monitor from this semester. The regularly scheduled course evaluations, these are the full semester-long classes, and it's like 95% of our course evaluations, opened on Monday, April 13th. And you can see that the purple little bump is the notifications. And then you can see the evaluations opened. We had a lot of activity. The most activity occurred during the 10 o'clock hour with over 1,000 course evaluations. The bottom image is 2 weeks later. And you can see when we had our different reminders. You can see we have a very kind of predictable pattern for how students, will, do their course evaluations. But you can see on Monday, April 27th, there are no reminders that went out to campus. And you can see that there's a giant green mountain of activity for the students submitting their course evaluations. And again, the most activity occurred during the 10 o'clock hour, with over 1,700 course evaluations being submitted. And as Kanika mentioned, this is when the most of our students, these are the time in the evaluation cycle where we see the most activity of students submitting their course evaluations, is immediately when content blocking goes into effect. It's the first and the second day, and then it trickles down. But that is when students are doing their course evaluations.
So, as we mentioned, as we understand student behavior through our surveys, we want to be flexible. And so we wanted to take you through, again, the process just to reiterate how things were. So there was leadership changes, but when content blocking was initially approved, it was a provost-led initiative that was partnered with ODS for implementation. So we received notice from our then provost, that they would like to use the course content blocking rather than some of the other features that the Canvas integration provides, like gradebook blocking. He wanted to do full course content blocking. And so Teresa and I got to work with Explorance in order to implement course content blocking. After that, we received emails from students and faculty because this transition was jarring and different than what they had previously experienced with course evaluations through Blue. And so there were discussions campus-wide with our leadership, with our vice provost, with students and faculty on what we could do to keep the course content blocking policy in place, but allow for more flexibility for students. And so concessions were made to offer opting out and then to increase the accessibility of opt-out for students. So with that, as we collect this information, our office is prioritizing understanding student engagement and how we can measure it. And so in understanding student engagement differently, we introduced the interaction metric, or the interaction rate. And so Teresa's going to explain to you the two images on the side for spring and spring 2025 and spring 2026. It does not mean that we have reduced looking at the response rate, which we are calling submission rate. It simply means that we are understanding how useful the Canvas tool has been for accessing students and getting them involved in the evaluation process. And so I'll hand it over to Teresa.
Alrighty, so these are images from the task management from the project. So spring of 2025. Our most stellar response rate ever is, you can see that we have 77.8% of submitted course evaluations. There was, which was like, you know, cue the confetti, that's for that. So everyone was very excited, but we also had 7.1% of students that decided not to do their course evaluations at that time. So that makes an interaction rate of 84.9, and you can see that like we had 15% of students that absolutely totally ignored their course evaluations. So for spring of 2026, you can see that we still had, at the time, we still had open evaluations. We have 64.6% of students that have done their course evaluations. So comparison to prior to deep integration, that is still excellent. Also, we have 20.6 students that explicitly decided to opt out. So when you add those together, we have 85.2 response or interaction rate. So that is good in the fact that that is a smidge higher than the interaction rate for the previous year. Not great that we have 20% of our students that are deciding not to do their course evaluations. And of course, you can see we have less than 13% of students that are totally ignoring them. So that is also a win. But for those students that are opting out, Kanika mentioned that our students are likely to either do all of their evaluations or none of their evaluations. And what we're finding with the students that are opting out, they are still doing some of their evaluation. So there is something that is encouraging or persuading them to do some evaluations, but not others. So this is definitely a population of great interest for us too, because we do want them to do their course evaluations.
So we wanted to explicitly look at the data and more on the interaction rate. So I'm going to start with the graph on the right-hand side. And so as you can see, these are our historically low course evaluations. This is pre-Canvas integration. And as you can see, we maintain between 31 and 32%. Then after in spring 2023, the integration with Canvas, we see immediate climbs to our response rates. We're at 66% for fall of 2023. And you also see the beginning of this policy to allow students to opt out as a concession. So traditionally, we looked at response rates as just submission rates. And currently, we're looking at both the interaction rate and the response rates. And so you can see this is our standard submission rate. As Teresa mentioned, we had a dip in fall. There were several holidays, change in leadership, several factors that led to that. So we're looking at this currently as an outlier. However, we are noticing an increasing trend in opt-outs, which is this purple line. And in fall, there was an 11.9% opt-out rate. And so this term, students are really exercising the use of the opt-out. And again, it is largely probably due to the access on the questionnaire itself. So within the questions, they can decide to opt out at any point. We see that, there's these lines trend similarly, but they are beginning to diverge. And so our next course of action with discussions, community policy is to understand how to integrate more of this opt-out percentage into our submission percentage to overall narrow the gap between our longitudinal trends of submission and interaction rate. On the left-hand side, you see, again, similar data. The stack bar represents the total interaction rate. And as you can see, again, compared to our previous pre-integration rates, we see significant increase. Obviously, the portion of red, which is our opt-out rates, is increasing. And so as we look towards our future opportunities, again, the goal is to have more similarly positioned students where they're integrated, they're engaged, they're providing thoughtful feedback, and they feel like they are a part of this dialogue between faculty, our administrators, and their courses. And so I will go to our next slide. So this information will also somewhat be covered in our Explorance World conference presentation, but we will be looking at this data, right? Our opt-out behavior, understanding which populations are disenfranchised by accessibility to this opt-out and how that impacts student voice. And so we do want to give you some overviews, but if you were interested in this policy and how it evolves, please see us at Explorance World. So in the graph, you can see that we're looking at academic level. One of our greatest strides was with this Canvas integration was seeing a huge jump in participation by freshmen. If you're familiar with our Explorance performances, we always talk about the academic level, race, ethnicity, and gender. And so we wanted to look at academic level and how the behaviors have changed. We still largely see 64.7. So our freshmen are still much more engaged than their peers. However, we are also seeing growth in all areas for opt-out. And so what do we understand about opt-outs? They're increasing and there's no evidence of a plateau. And so we need to get ahead of the proclivity to opt out and get people more engaged. Again, additional terms of data are necessary to understand these populations, but we are looking at that data and we will be presenting more on that. So interaction rates are consistent. So if you look at the previous slide, we are seeing that people are getting into Blue. And that was one of our strongest barriers to feedback, was that students didn't have accessibility. And so because of the interaction rates, we are seeing that the effectiveness of Canvas integration is high. We're looking at 85% interaction rates where students were not in Blue at all, or the majority of students were not. And so we want to leverage how to make it more attractive to provide feedback and to get faculty involved to promote, especially evaluations inside the class itself. And then obviously there are trade-offs from increasing our opt-out accessibility. So having it on the questionnaire adds an option that really does produce less complaints from students and they feel like they're empowered through the ability to choose. However, it does increase the likelihood that they will opt out. And so which voices are not being heard when we do opt out or increase opt-out rates overall. So we did want to give you an idea. At the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, we do evaluate instructors and course. So we wanted to look at instructor data because one of the hugest complaints we received from our faculty was that increasing the response rates was going to decrease overall ratings for instructors because there was an idea that grades influence feedback. And we'll talk about that research later. And so we're seeing that things like the instructor was well prepared. The instructor was concerned on whether I understood the material and available for consultation. If you look at the data, and this is a Likert scale, right, 1 through 5, our students are primarily selecting 4s and 5s in their instructor feedback. And if you look at the last 2 columns, for those that are selecting 3 or greater on the Likert scale for their instructors, and you see this with term over term and with the course feedback, we're looking at 95% as the minimum of satisfaction with their instructors and their instruction. And then if you're looking at 4 or greater, we're seeing that students by and large are satisfied. So 4 we consider to be an excellent rating for instructors, and we're seeing at minimum 84.8% of students are saying that they are satisfied with their instructors. And so it kind of debunks this idea that additional feedback will decrease positive ratings for instructors and for their courses. We're seeing by and large that students are very successful. And it also points out that this course content blocking policy does not negatively impact instructor ratings, because that was another concern, that this was such a controversial policy that students would be reflecting that in the way that they rate instructors. And we have found that the data does not show that. So understanding the feedback, right? Again, this is just summarizing. 95% on average of our students are rating our instructors and courses over a 3 or more. And they're rating 4 or greater at an 85% rate minimally. So our students are satisfied. They express high marks for instructors and courses, and they really do appreciate the education that they're getting at UNLV. And again, understanding that course content blocking, based on the data that we have, rarely influences the way students give feedback. I think that that's really important, because questions that we receive at Explorance are always like, how does that impact students when they're so upset about this policy? And so overall, we're seeing that their assessments are still high. They're able to distinguish their dissatisfaction with the policy and still provide high marks for their instructors, or honest feedback on how they feel about their course instruction and their instructors without the bias of the content blocking policy.
So, as was mentioned, we had historically a 30-something% response rate. And we've definitely had some improvements with the course evaluation. So some of those outstanding areas regarding course evaluations, like these can be viewed as my favorites. We have the executive MBA program. And the EMBA program, when it was created, it's a very unique program. They made course evaluations mandatory when the program was created. Students must complete their course evaluations, or final grades are not released to students. That's insanely effective. As you can see, they have a 100% response rate. And they've maintained that for over 20 years. So I don't remember when the program was started, but they've had that consistently. And so when we had to start doing their course evaluations due to the provost mandate, we worked very closely with them to make sure that they kept their same language for their student notifications, that their evaluation window was the same, that we did everything we could, that we didn't ruin their 100% streak. And so they're very unique, very special, but they have managed the 100% consistently for decades. We have the Honors College. The Honors College, of course, has high-performing students. They have also done better than the institutional average, but I spoke with their dean and associate dean, and they're very quick, to point out that they have great students. And they also mentioned that they provide frequent reminders to their faculty about the course evaluations whenever they're open and encourage them to use time in class. And the Honors College has predominantly all face-to-face, if not all in-person classes. They have very few, if any, online hybrid sections. So logistically, it is very easy for the faculty to allow class time. And a funny thing that the deans mentioned was they're like, I just think the students are absolutely terrified of not having access to their content in Canvas. And they think that their impression of the deans from knowing their students is that the threat of content blocking is a great motivator for these students for them to do their course evaluations. School of Public Health, unlike the previous examples who were holdouts until the provost mandate, has always had higher response rates than the institutional average. And what their dean's office does, they also communicate with their faculty, like the Honors College, but they also communicate with their students that they have course evaluations open. And they have contacted our office enough times. They know when Blue sends out the notifications. They schedule their reminders on different days. So their notifications to the students go to all of their students, reminding them to do the course evaluations and also thanking the ones that have already done the course evaluations. And something that they do is they share the response rates with both groups. So it is a team effort and everybody knows where the school is on the response rates. And so some things that I'm learning for increasing response rates at our institution is, of course, making it a requirement. And as I mentioned, the EMBA program is really special. I'm aware that this cannot be applied in almost any other circumstance, but it is very, very effective. Students want to know their final grades and they're not going to appreciate their classmates that will make them wait. So maybe when designing new programs at an institution, this may be a consideration to maybe have, for any new programs. Incentives are also seem to be popular. This is also known as extra credit, and this will also vary a lot depending on the academic units because they are going to have their own individual policies about what may or may not be included towards like students' graded work. But when available, students seem to greatly appreciate it. And what I'm learning from reaching out to faculty that have the high response rates, and that also use extra credit, is that it is not based on the individual student doing the course evaluation. So a student does their course evaluation and they get 3 extra credit points. It is based on the whole class doing the course evaluation, and then the whole class may get whatever the incentive is, if it's towards the final grade or maybe on the final exam. That seems to be the most effective. And then from what I have heard is that it's the borderline students that are, have one foot, that are really, really close to maybe getting another grade up, are going to be the biggest reminders of the classmates as opposed to the instructor to find out who has done the course evaluations. And, they're going to do the work to make sure that they can get like that extra boost to their grade. And also, of course, access. So after doing the deep integration, our response rates institutionally have stayed higher than they were prior to the deep integration. So this is an institutionally wide available tool. So as I mentioned, there's multiple places for the students to conveniently access their course evaluations. And it's made a huge difference, and particularly the content blocking during the regular semester is not a popular feature at all. Nobody on campus will openly admit to liking it, but it has been extremely effective in getting students to submit their response rates.
Perfect. So we did want to close with some ongoing conversations and insights that really feed how we utilize this information with these increased response rates. And so as you can see from the graphic, there are several things that are being feeding this increase, as well as helping to use this data to support students and their overall experience at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And so we wanted to start with research. So as the Office of Decision Support, as we said at the beginning of the presentation, we are also responsible for institutional research and effectiveness. And so our office has led individual research that is prompted by faculty, and it really is to understand their concerns about having this policy implemented and how students provide feedback and bias in the feedback. And so previously we've done research about gender-based bias and also understanding grades distributions, because again, what these faculty's concern is that having additional student feedback would impair their ability to receive positive Likert scale grading and qualitative comments. And so our Vice Provost, Skip Crooker, and our Director of Research, Ching-Min Shi, have published work on the relationship between grades and feedback, and they have found that there is no bias based on grading, that grading doesn't have a statistically significant impact on how students review students at our institution. And so it's something that if you guys are interested in seeing the research, we can provide links to that. But it's something that's very powerful, and it helps to shape the dynamic on how we have these discussions with faculty, quelling their concerns about student feedback, and also making them more involved and engaged with student feedback, because they are utilized in their annual reviews, right? When they meet with their superiors, their department chairs, their deans, they do have to bring their course evaluation reports as a part of it, and it helps to bring positivity to that conversation by understanding that there's less bias than they think, and no statistically significant bias, actually. Another thing that we've been working on are dashboards, right? When we talk about closing the feedback loop and we talk about getting faculty the metrics that support positive integration of feedback, we began discussions with Blue about getting API connections to import and export data out of Blue. But more importantly, our OIT team and ODS have been working to get data into our test environment. Some of that data has already been transitioned, and it gives us the opportunity to start prototyping dashboards that will be available to our leadership, our faculty, and it'll be available in report form to students so they understand how their colleges are doing and what students believe. And that'll be the same kind of questions that are on the survey. So they won't be based on instructor level or department level, but we are looking to start with college level feedback dashboarding and reports. And I think students' most major complaint is that they don't understand what course evaluations do and how they value the education. And so having these available through the faculty and through the students through our website will really assist in creating a culture that supports providing feedback and really giving students assurance that we are looking at this data.
So Kanika mentioned the dashboards and some reporting. So of course, we want to make more information available to campus as, we come from a very, very long history of very siloed processes for the course evaluation. So to share information regarding the course evaluations and to make that information available to our campus will be very big. So Kanika mentioned the dashboards and of course, developing reports, making sure that our administrators have access to the course evaluation data that they need, whether that is available on a publicly facing website or just available in Blue is very important. Something that I'm learning is very important is letting the people and the groups that are doing course evaluations really well, let them know that they're doing really well. Our honors college had no idea that they had like the highest response rates out of the schools. So it's, so people don't know how they're doing. Kanika mentioned that the research is based on kind of like faculty concerns, and to be able to show that like, no, our faculty are doing a phenomenal job. So just kind of take away the concern for the course evaluations. We also, students can be told by individual faculty what their course evaluations are being used for, but to let the students see institutionally that yes, the information is being used, it is available, they can actually see it, I think is going to be really important. And, next, this is always an ongoing a collaborative effort. So we've made multiple changes to the course evaluations, like procedures through, in the last few years to try to make it as convenient, easy to address any concerns that the campus community might have. And we've talked about, what those were, but I think right now we're in a very, very good place for the institution by, doing things like adjusting the course evaluation window so the students have access during study week, by making it really, really easy for any students that want to do not do course evaluations. Nobody can make the argument that the course evaluation information received is in any way forced or coerced by, from the students with content blocking. And we also allow students to completely edit their course evaluations while the course evaluation window is open. So they can opt in, they can opt out, they can opt back in again, they can edit any submitted responses so that they have the time to make the course, provide the feedback that they want to provide. And things are pretty good. We had this semester, I think this is a system that works. I only had 3 grumpy grams. So there were 115,531 fill out tasks for this semester, and there was only 3 grumpy grams that were free. So I think this is very successful. There will be additional changes to the course evaluation process, particularly with Blue 9 getting implemented very soon. But I feel like right now we are at a very good place with our successes. And so thank you so much for attending, and we hope to see you in Boston, and we hope to be able to answer some of your questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. We apologize again about the video malfunction, and we'd love to see you all in person since we didn't get to see you here. But yes, we welcome questions, and we thank you and appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Teresa and Kanika. If you flip to the next slide, our audience will be able to see your pictures. There you go. Kanika and Teresa will be at Explorance World, taking place in Boston, June 16th to the 19th. Their session will be on June 19th at 10:10 in the morning. And Kanika, Teresa, you talked a lot today about how you increased your response rates by implementing leveraging the very deep integration between Blue and Canvas, using strategies like content blocking, communication, and then closing the loop as well. So I think that what we were discussing a little bit, what your session will be about at Explorance World. So now that you've increased your response rates, you will be sharing a little bit about what you're doing with all the feedback and the insights that you're collecting through your course evaluation policy or strategy. Do you want to say a little bit about that? One of the questions is, so how has increased participation or response rates, or I think you called it engagement or submission rates, have changed the way that you interpret and use the student feedback? Maybe you want to talk a little bit about that? And I think that's going to be the focus of your session as well at Explorance World.
Absolutely. So we are looking at this data, especially because it's such a recent policy and because of the changes in administration. We are understanding which initiatives are central to institutional goals. And so more than just assessing, we want to create tools. And so creating the tools to assess is our first and primary goal. That's through the dashboarding and reports. That's through increasing conversations that really promote how well rated our students feel about their instructors and their courses. When we were initially implementing this policy, there was a little bit of trepidation that increasing the feedback would reduce ratings for courses, colleges, and instructors. And so by being able to publicize our successes and allow student comments to be seen through the dashboards and reports. That's really our first goal. We're doing a lot of quantitative research and also qualitative research to understand the nature of the comments, the sentiments behind them. And so that will be something that we discuss at the Explorance World conference in our session as well. What we're finding in the qualitative comments, what are students struggling with, and but overall, we see, as we showed, that students are very satisfied with their instructors and their courses. And so really, again, promoting what we are doing well and how that informs future curriculum changes, how our programs evolve, and addressing student needs.
The fact that you implemented content blocking, so a couple of questions around that. First of all, did you have to explain that? Was there a communication strategy around that to students and faculty? And do you feel, because of the content blocking, that some of the feedback is negative because some of the students are frustrated with this policy?
So when content blocking was implemented, it was a top-down decision. And so it was made by the current provost at the time. And then it was shared with different communities. So like the deans, the department chairs, they met with the student council, shared, it was upcoming, but I don't think anyone really took it seriously. It was originally going to be implemented in the fall of 2023. And so the announcements were made at the beginning of the semester. I think people forgot about it. There was additional notification closer to the course evaluation cycle that this was going to happen. And that is when the outrage ensued. And what happened, because this was all new soon after the deep integration had happened in the summer, just after our course evaluations opened, there was a major Canvas upgrade that we didn't know about, and it broke the links in Canvas. Mm-hmm. So we postponed it until spring. So a lot of the outrage, and particularly from students, they didn't want to be blocked out of their courses from Canvas during study week. That is when all of those important final papers and projects are submitted. And they thought that was an especially jerk move. So we made the adjustment to make sure that it's early. Of course, then faculty they're like, well, this is too early. And it's like, well, do you want your students to have access during, study week? So that usually wins. So it has been several semesters. And then by able to do the research and be able to look at the responses prior to course, content blocking and after, be like, well, there's not a difference. In the comments, students usually they're not taking it out on their instructor. They'll be stumped. It's like, I think this is stupid. But they're not criticizing the class. They're criticizing the policy and the phenomenon that they waited more than 2 weeks to do their course evaluation. And now they want to get into their class content.
And if I may add, so were there correspondences? Yes. Were there discussions at the provost level with our vice provost, with the deans? Yes. Obviously, something like this does change the way that students interact with the survey. And so the discussions were had prior to ensure that people were aware of the policy. I think where the miscommunication may have happened is that people didn't understand what course content blocking was in its action. People would say, yes, this makes sense as far as a policy, but when it actually took place, people didn't understand how the functionality of it worked in Canvas. And so that's where we saw complaints. But we did look at the data to see if there were comments about content blocking that were affecting the overall grades, and we did not see in large evidence of that. Students primarily gave feedback to the email that's provided in the survey. And unfortunately, Teresa had to be the person that filtered through all of that feedback. And so our vice provost also received feedback via email. And so it wasn't that the students were really expressing their discontentment through the survey. They were expressing it through email, through calling the university or our office and department, and for expressing it with other leadership.
There was, and of course, there's the communication. So there's been, we now have several semesters of where this has been the standard practice. But a while ago, I did have a conversation with a MIFT faculty member because they had a test. It was a graduate level class in a computer lab, and content blocking was in effect. And they were very upset. And it was like, well, this is posted on your syllabi policy. This is, like everybody is notified. There was messages from the provost office, and they're like, well, I didn't read those.
Mm.
And so people are learning. And like I said, we try to make adjustments as we can to satisfy as many populations as we can on campus.
Fantastic. We've I just wanted to mention to everyone listening that in the resources section that you can access at the bottom panel, we've included the UNLV case study so that you can read more about the experience with Blue and Canvas. We've included also more information about the integration, the deep integration between Blue and Canvas, links to Explorance World. And maybe we can go to the next slide, Kanika or Teresa. Here's more info. There's a QR code to join us in Boston. And finally, the last slide, we talked about the response rates tournament that we launched and you still have time to submit your stories. These are the type of stories that we're looking for. And the next slide shows what we're looking for. It's really easy to submit your story around your response rates. What we're looking for is choose a survey with a response rate that you're really proud of. So maybe it's course evaluation or a general student survey. Tell us a little bit about the survey, how many questions, how many respondents. Tell us a little bit about your strategy. Did you use content blocking or also LMS integration, QR code perhaps? Tell us a little bit about your strategy, communication, closing the loop. And then all you have to do is take a screenshot of your best or your most proudest response rate and upload it. And that's how you would participate and get a chance to be get to benchmark yourself against other institutions. We're going to create a leaderboard. We're going to celebrate at Explorance World. And then we're going to take all the data or all the different response rates and then provide all that information back in a report in the fall. So Teresa and Kanika, thank you so much. I hope that you also participate. You have a great story for the Global Response Rates Tournament. I look forward to seeing you both in Boston at Explorance World. And thank you very much again for sharing this very inspiring story with our audience. Thank you, everyone, and hope to see you soon. Take care.